We are going to be creating this game for this video. It's a simple game to create, but it tackles a lot of essential aspects of Unity. I believe that this is an ideal tutorial for someone who is new to game dev. So to get started, let's put our level together. Right click on the hierarchy and create a new empty object. Rename it to level. This will serve as the parent to our level. Right click on the level object and go under 3D objects and create a new cube. Assign the cubes accordingly to create the level. You can use Ctrl+D as a shortcut to duplicate objects. Next, right click on the hierarchy and create another cube. This will be our player. Let's quickly make a new material to set to our player to stand out. Now we can start making our first script, which will be responsible for moving our player. Click on our player object and click on the Add Component button and name the script Player Movement. For this script, we want our player to follow the position of the mouse. To do that, we can cast an invisible ray from our camera to the mouse position to figure out the 3D position of the mouse. Here's how we can do that in code. We start by declaring a private vector3 called lookPose, which will store the 3D position of the mouse. Now, in the update function, we create a region to keep our code tidy, and then we cast our ray, and if something was hit, we store the hit position in the lookPose. Great, now we can use the lookPose variable to move the player. Before we do that though, we need to quickly set our camera to a better position and also create a cube in front of the camera for the raycast to collide. Now we can actually start moving our player. Back to the player movement script, we simply assign the x-axis of the lookPose to the x-axis of the player, while keeping the other axis untouched to make the player move. As we can see, the movement script works nicely, but we need to make some adjustments to keep the player from going off the borders. To keep our player from going off the borders, we simply need to tell the player movement script that when the mouse goes off the borders, which is more than 2.0 or less than -2.0 on the x-axis, to just hold the player on the borders. To do that in the movement script, we need to first change the player position only if the mouse is within the -2.0 and 2.0 area, and then block the player if the mouse is off the allowed area. Now our player won't go outside the allowed area. Next, we will create the shooting mechanic of the game. So first create a sphere, name it to bullet and reset its transform. Next, add the rigid body component to detect collisions and create a new script called bullet. In this new script, we simply need to make the bullet go forward and delete the bullet in case it collides with the enemy or simply flies far enough. And now to actually spawn our bullet, we need to save our bullet as a prefab and then go back to our player script and instantiate the bullet when the left click is pressed. After we assign our bullet prefab to the player script, we have the shooting functionality working. Now we need to actually create enemies to shoot at. The enemies will have a simple behavior, they will run towards the player trying to pass through. So to do that, create a new capsule, rename it to enemy, add the rigid body component, set it to kinematic, and create a new script called enemy. Before we move into code, we have to also create a new object called enemy spawn to spawn enemies from. In the enemy script, we simply make the enemy move towards the player and get destroyed if it comes in contact with a bullet. We will know if it came in contact with a bullet by changing the bullet's tag to bullet. Before we move on from the script, we will add some more code to our onTriggerEnter function to check if the enemy has passed the player. Then we simply add a collider behind the player for the enemies to collide with. Now that our enemy is ready, we can quickly make a prefab of the enemy and create an enemy spawn script on the enemy spawn object. For the enemy spawn script, we are going to be referencing the enemy prefab and creating a function to spawn the enemies at random positions while calling the function at the end of the same function to create an endless loop of spawning enemies, and we simply call the function at the start to start the loop. Now we add the enemy prefab to the enemy spawn script and our game is mostly done. We have working enemies which you can destroy, All we need to do now is keep track of how many enemies you have destroyed and how many managed to pass through. To start doing that, we first need to set up our texts on the corner of the screens. We are going to be creating 4 different texts. The top 2 are going to be static, while the bottom 2 are going to display the score. Next, click on the canvas object and create a new script and name it Canvas Manager. In this script, we are going to be referencing the 2 bottom texts we created, and we are going to be changing the text's values by using 2 new integers. We will also create 2 functions to increase the value of the 2 new integers we created. Now to actually make our score work, we need to go back to our enemy script and reference the Canvas Manager script we created, and in the onTriggerEnter function, call the functions we created in the Canvas Manager. Now we just go back to Unity and assign our text to the Canvas Manager script. Finally, we can add some graphics to change the plane cubes to make the game look a little prettier, and we are basically done. As always, the files of the project will be in the description. Feel free to do whatever you want with them. That's all for now, until next time.